Hello, I'm Anthony. Today we're going to take a look at the Hypnotic Dance macro extension for Halion. Think of macro extensions like expansion modules. This is basically a plugin inside a plugin. So Hypnotic Dance adds functionality to Halion, or wraps up functionality in kind of a skin and presents it to you in a friendly and interactive way. Hypnotic Dance really excels at arpeggiated and sequenced sounds. I've loaded up this preset step mod SQ3. Let's have a listen to it before we go any further. Okay, so what you're hearing there, that primary kind of arpeggio sound, is coming from the step modulator. This is a component inside the parent Halion. We have a look over at the step modulator section. Here it is, and those shapes, as you can see, map one for one with what you can see in the window below. So what we're going to do today is break down Hypnotic Dance. We're going to have a look at each of these sections and figure out how its primary functionality works. And then we're going to try to figure out how it integrates with Halion so that we can understand a little bit more about that relationship. Hope you enjoyed this video today. If you do, please check out the Patreon or YouTube channel member links below. Awesome way to help support my channel. Let's start off in the top left-hand corner. We have a voices section over in the main edit section of Halion. Voice control is what we're talking about here. So from the Halion perspective, we have unison engaged, we have a couple of voices, we have pan set to 100%. Over in the macro view, here we have unison engaged, here's a couple of voices, here's pan at 100%. You're always going to find that each one of the controls in a macro ties to something somewhere behind the scenes in Halion, and those connections are performed invisibly, so you can't actually see the connecting wires, but you can infer very easily how these connections are made. So at the moment, this preset's a monophonic preset. If I press two notes simultaneously, you only ever hear one of them. Let's disengage mono. Pretty obvious we've switched to polyphonic mode there with the poly knob becoming enabled. And in unison mode, we can thicken the sound up even more by increasing the number of voices. Let's go up to 6. Now I'll play a single note. I need to keep a very close eye on my volume when I do that, because every voice that you add is going to make it louder. Let's turn it back down to 2. And a really nice thing to do when you have unison engaged is have a little bit of detune. That little bit of tuning offset between the two voices really helps thicken the sound up. If I turn detune all the way down to 0, that's a much kind of flatter, less interesting sound than if we have a little bit. If you have too much detune, you can push it too far, and you'll actually start to hear the difference between the tones. That's a little bit more of a kind of a challenging thing to enjoy. Now I can really quite clearly, hear those two voices being detuned against each other. Let's turn that back down to 7 and then have a look over at the filter section. So all of the controls in this center section map somewhere in the edit filter page, cutoff, resonance. This distortion control, which is currently set to 19%, is available because we have a tube drive engaged. If I had a different kind of filter type, let's say classic, then the distortion control would disappear. This is a lot of the stuff, the heavy lifting that's done for you with these macros. Options are selected that make this preset sound good, and you don't have to worry about tying this distortion control into the front end. It's done for you, and we implicitly have this drive control. Let's have a listen to that. Very nice. Now here's another thing about these macros and Hypnotic Dance in particular. Many controls in Halion very often map into the same destination. So if I change the cutoff control on this preset as it stands right now, you're not actually going to hear any difference. Let's try it. The reason for that is that other modulation sources are mapping into this cutoff control at the same time and basically hiding our ability to hear any difference. Let's have a look in the modulation matrix in Halion to understand this a little bit better. Here's our modulation matrix section. When we have a look at the modulation wheel, you can see that we have negative modulation being applied to the filter cutoff. So here's my modulation wheel, currently set all the way down to 0. You can see it in the interface. So it was set to 0. So if you want to try to understand negative modulation, which I personally quite strongly dislike, what's actually happened is that the logic for this modulation wheel has been flipped. with the modulation wheel all the way down, we've basically pushed the filter cutoff all the way up. And so that's kind of overriding any changes that we make in the interface. An easy way to take the modulation wheel out of the picture is to control click on it, and now it's not doing anything. Let's jump back over to the macro. We're still not quite there though, because if you have a look in the quick control commands for this preset, you can see that cutoff's been turned all the way up here as well. So I'm going to turn that down to 12 o'clock. And finally, by changing some of the other modulation sources, we've wrestled control back so that we can do something from this interface. Let's have a go. If I turn this quick control up, and I've taken the modulation out of the range of this cutoff control again. And this is one of the tricky things with Halion and Macros and the relationship between the two of them. Trying to understand all of these connections can sometimes be a little bit daunting. That's why I try to go into as much detail as I can with these videos to really help you understand what's happening behind the scenes. I'm just going to reload this preset, get rid of all those changes I've just made. Now we'll have a look at the amplifier section. This is our primary volume control. Let's have a quick look where it lives inside the interface behind. So if I select the layer, basically everything that's concerned with this macro is going to live somewhere inside this layer. The main volume control for any layer can be found in the sound tab, and here you can see it level offset. If I pull that down to about 3 o'clock, jump over to the macro, sure enough the level has changed. And the attack and release controls that we can see here, we can find in the zone, and that's in the envelope section. Here's our attack and release. So by default, we have no attack. I switch over to the edit page and introduce some attack in the envelope. You can hear that attack coming in now. And now I have modulation options in the macro as to how much or how little of that attack I introduce. So make the attack as fast as I possibly can, set it to -100. And the sound is instant once again. It's this layering concept. Find the control behind the scenes that's doing the job. In this case, I had to introduce some attack in order to be able to do anything functional with this control. And then you basically treat the macro control as a modulator, something that's offsetting that primary value plus or minus. Let's reload the sound again, keep everything nice and clean. Now it's time to have a look at the step modulator. This is the thing that's generating that kind of pseudo arpeggio. Watch these dark sections as effectively I'm calling it an arpeggio, but it's really a modulated sequence. Each one of these coloured sections is representing a positive or negative modulation that's being applied to some destination somewhere in Halion. Now I'm being deliberately vague about this because the step modulator in Hypnotic Dance is capable of performing multiple functions simultaneously. Now this is where we get into a little bit of voodoo with Hypnotic Dance, but I am going to show you the process because this is really what you need to go through to kind of understand what's going on here. Jump back over to the edit page and have a look at the modulation matrix. There's going to be a couple of things that we need to pay attention to. Firstly, I'm going to scroll down and have a look at modulation entry number 15, and believe it or not, it has to be exactly modulation row 15. This is one of these kind of fairly clunky tie-ins between Halion and Hypnotic Dance. Section 15 has to map the step modulator to something. Now it doesn't have to be bus 1 as it is in this particular case, but this is where we connect the step modulator to something else somewhere in Halion. This is obviously one of the functions of the macro design. The macro is being coded to look specifically at step 15. So here's the step modulator mapping into bus 1. So what on earth is bus 1? It's a really generic and kind of unhelpful term. The modulation engine in Halion has 16 generic buses that can be used to basically collect together, treat them, well, just like any other bus anywhere in any kind of system. It's something where multiple different sources can all collect together and speak a common language. So the step modulator is connecting to bus 1. Bus 1 isn't currently doing anything at all. We have to tell bus 1 what job we want it to do. So now if we scroll up to the top of the modulation matrix, you can see that bus 1 is actually connected to 4 independent destinations. So this is a two-way journey. The step modulator connects to this bus, this generic bus, treat it like a group track. And that bus is then routing information in 4 different directions. It's going to the pitch, filter cutoff, level or volume, and pan. So the step modulator is doing all of those jobs simultaneously. Let's jump back over to the macro. You can see our depth is currently set to 100%. I'm going to slow the sequence right down so that we can really easily hear what's happening on each of these segments, and have a look in the tuner as well. So we went from 132 Hertz down to 32 Hertz, which is basically a span of 2 octaves. If we treat the center point, if there was no Hypnotic Dance here, the center point of the C that I'm playing is 66 Hertz there or thereabouts. When you double that, we're jumping up to the top to jump up an octave, and when you halve it, we go down to 32 Hertz. So now we've figured out this step modulator has a maximum span of 2 octaves. That's one of the 4 jobs it's doing. If I turn the depth down a little bit, it's no longer going to get all the way there. The modulation that it's applying to the pitch is now not going to be 100%, and you're going to hear a pitch other than C. Happened to be a G sharp there. Different depth. There's a D. So there you can see this kind of modulation kind of being added to the sound, and at 100%, when this depth knob is all the way up, we get all the way up to 131 Hertz. One of the other jobs that this step modulator doing is it's modulating the filter cutoff, so the higher pitched sounds have a much brighter, because they've got a higher filter cutoff being set than the lower sounds. We're also getting panning. Let's jump back over to the edit screen again, have a look at the pan. So we have 25% pan being set here. I'm just going to actually increase that so we can really accentuate the sound. And then you can watch the stereo output if you want to see this. So there you can see the right hand pan followed by the left hand pan. Step modulator is doing all of these jobs simultaneously. So this is a really powerful effect where we're using this fairly simple shape to do all of these different jobs simultaneously and generating a really complex and interesting sound. The step modulator in Halion is kind of fundamentally great to start with, and then to have all of this functionality bundled up and given to us in these kind of really friendly kind of bite-sized packages. That's what you get with a Hypnotic Dance preset. It's not necessarily that it's doing anything incredibly complicated. It's just taking all of these different kind of modulation capabilities, wrapping them all up, turning them into a great sound. Now, one of the really cool effects of the step modulator in Halion is the ability to modulate the slopes for each of these sections. At the moment, everything is kind of very angular, but we have a slope function. As you can see, it's called slope on falling edges at the moment. These are one of the options available to us. If I increase the amount, then I've just made an even more interesting modulation option. So now all of those different modulation destinations are going to be modulated in this sloping way. Speed it up a little bit. How cool is that? Let's have a look over in the edit screen just to confirm all of this functionality lives in the step modulator. It's capable of doing all of these things. Here's my slope option. Here's the amount of slope that I'm currently manipulating. And when I change that value and jump back over to the macro, you can see it's reflected over there. All of the sync and retrig options, these also tie in intrinsically into Halion. I'll put a link above actually to a video where I just deconstruct the step modulator in Halion. I've done a very long video on that, so I won't rehearse all of these, but basically this is where you get to decide what happens every time you press a key. Do you want this step sequencer to kind of restart every single time, or if you hold one note down and bring other notes in, you can get a much more kind of continuous effect, and that's what's actually happening with first note. If I hold one note down and then bring other notes in, see, it's not re-triggering the sequence every time. It's basically adding those notes into the sequence, starting off, a new kind of arpeggiated effect. I'm going to load in the second preset now. I'm going to load in the Mystic Arp preset to show you a different kind of effect with Hypnotic Dance. We still have a step modulator engaged. When we jump into the edit page and we have a look at the modulation matrix, Let's go down to our kind of secret step 15. What's it connected to now? Now the step modulator is only connected to a single destination, which means we don't need to route it through bus 1. We can connect directly to the pan. As you can see, at the moment it's set to 0. Let's turn it all the way up. So now every time the step modulator has something to do, we're going to hear a panned effect. Let's see what that sounds like. You can hear and you can see in the stereo output actually, all of those pans are to one side. Let's make it more dramatic by alternating the pan option. And that's lovely. Where's that arpeggio coming from? In the first preset, we didn't have any kind of pre-programmed notes, but now I'm playing a chord and I'm hearing an arpeggio. That's because this preset is utilizing the flex phraser. Let's have a look at the expanded tree. And if we jump over to the flex phraser, here you can see it's on and the phrase is currently up. So when I play that C major chord, it's plain notes spread over 2 octaves and they're all going up. Here's our octaves control. Octave range is, even though it's set to 1, that basically means add an extra octave on top. If I control click to set that to 0, now we're just playing notes over the octave that's actually being held down, the keys that are being held down. So there's 2 different limbs of approach here, understanding hypnotic dance and what all of the controls do, and then diving behind the scenes and understanding how it integrates with Halion. It really helps to have a good understanding of the modulation matrix. You'll very often see really good kind of assistance in the modulation matrix for what's going on. Because the step modulator doesn't have a specific routing like all of the other controls to do, it needs that magic slot 15 in the modulation matrix to say, well, this is the job I want to do. And if you want to do multiple jobs, then route it through a bus. Hope this video has been useful to you. Consider subscribing if you enjoy my content. I'll see you for the next one. Thanks very much.